This is Ryan Finkelstein, the host of Locked On Mets, coming from my sister's basement. So I'm still on vacation, which is why you are getting an audio-only show today, but it is a great one. Omar Narváez signs with the Mets, and a lot of bats fell off of the market. How can the Mets juice up their offense, and what does the Narváez signing mean for the catcher situation? Is James McCann definitely gone? Now, how long will it take before we see Francisco Alvarez? All of that and more on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. On the show today, we have a surprise signing to discuss. The New York Mets add catcher Omar Narváez, trying to juice up the offense a bit, which could mean that James McCann's days as a Met are numbered. We're going to discuss why the Mets signed Narváez, what's next with McCann, can they find a suitor to trade him, what would a trade look like, and also if the Mets are planning on a little bit less of Francisco Alvarez at catcher than we expected, how are they going to add more punch to their offense? We're going to get to all that, but first, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, Omar Narváez signed with the Mets on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, and if any of you have been listening to this show for any period of time, really, you know that it is a little bit odd for me to not jump on and record a podcast if a signing or a trade happens. Anytime I've even been on vacation, always have my laptop and a mic with me, and I'll just put something out there. That's always been my thing. Because I know a lot of you like to hear my thoughts on moves and get my gut reaction. And if you heard me then, you might have heard a little bit of a different tune than what I will tell you now. But I have to let you know, especially for the longtime listeners that have been here for we're near 1,000 episodes, why I did not jump on a podcast. And yes, I'm on vacation, but that has not stopped me before. I actually got engaged on Wednesday, and so my now fiance was with me for the first leg of my vacation here, Wednesday through Sunday, and for really the first time since I was 19 years old. I closed the laptop, I didn't do any writing, I didn't do any podcasting, and I just spent time with her and my sister's family, and honestly had the time of my life. So for me, had to take some personal time, not something I do often, but I guess as I eventually get married, I might have to do that a time or two throughout the year. Priorities change, but I will always give you my take on the Mets move. So let's get into it. They signed Omar Narváez, and if you heard my gut reaction then, which I did tweet out about it, I said, I hate this move, I think, something along those lines, but we'll talk about it on Monday. I've softened on it a bit because if you just tell me money's no object, which Steve Cohen's Mets, that's absolutely the case, and you are subbing Omar Narváez for James McCann on the 2023 roster, good move. Good move, okay? Look at the career numbers. 258 hitter for Narváez, 343 on base, 386 slugging, a 101 WRC+. Plus, again, the measure is based on a league average of 100. So for his career, in 600 games, he's essentially been a league average hitter, and for a catcher, that's incredible, especially because he's gotten a lot better defensively. He's now one of the better pitch framing catchers in baseball. You know, I couldn't tell you exactly how those metrics, year by year are really going to favor a Narváez or a McCann, but both of these guys, good defensive catchers. Okay, so you got that part out of the way, and you're hoping for a little more bat with Narváez. You know, last year it wasn't great. 206 hitter, 292 on base, 305 slugging, a 71 WRC+. plus. James McCann was a 195 hitter, 257 on base percentage, 282 slugging, a 59 WRC+. Plus. So he was even worse. And for his career, 243 hitter for McCann, 296 on base, 380 slugging, all of them basically worse than Narváez, an 83 WRC plus. And the strikeouts and the walks, that tells me a lot about a hitter. James McCann for his career, strikeout rate of 25.8%, walk rate at just 6%. Narváez walks at a 10.7% clip, which is very solid. He strikes out less than 20% of the time at 19%. That's held up last season at 19.3. And he had some better seasons in 2018 and 2019 where he hit. Really, if you go back to 2017, it was like a 3-year span where he had an average over 270, on base percentage over 350 each year. In 2018, 2019, the slug was over 400 both those years, 429 in 2018, 460 in 2019. WRC plus, he was 21% better than your league average hitter in 2018, 20% better in 2019. He hit 22 homers in 2019. So the profile's there a little bit for some better results. You shield him from left-handed pitching, that's going to help a lot. You platoon him with Nido. It works. It makes sense. It's a good starting point, and it takes the pressure off Francisco Alvarez. You don't have to start him day one. And that's what this signing tells me, is that if they were going to move James McCann, they were not comfortable just giving the keys to Alvarez. And look, he's a 20-year-old catcher. As much as I want to see it, I can get my head around it. Okay, and for the contract, $8 million for the first year, $7 million player option. I don't love that money for Narváez. If it was the way I was building a team, I would not have gone this route. I would have just said, look, we're going to live and die with the defensive-minded catchers. We're going to go with Nido. I would have tried to maybe see if you could get some, catcher on a minor league deal that's a good defensive third option, where if you start the season with Nido and other guys as your two catchers as you're waiting on Alvarez, cool. And I would have left a wide open pathway for Alvarez to be my starting catcher, because I believe in the offense that much, and because I actually do believe in Tomas Nido as a really good defensive catcher, and as a guy that is still young enough in his career that we saw enough little glimpses of offensively that he could surprise us with maybe even a little more regular playing time. Not that to keep it great, but again, you're grading on the curve of catchers. Still, though, it's a move that I don't necessarily love. I do understand it, and if James McCann's off the roster, I'm cool with it. And again, it's not my money. So if the Mets decide to just cut James McCann and pay Narváez, and Cohen's got a bloated payroll for 2 years anyway, which is what we're kind of heading towards, and money doesn't matter, why should I care? Why should I care that he's probably paying more at the catcher position than he should? But you know what? If Francisco Alvarez in the next 2 seasons comes up and is the player that we think he can be, none of it will matter. So we'll just see what happens. I think the one area of this that I don't love, if it was a 1-year, $8 million deal, I like it a lot more, because then you could be at a point where, it could be a Tomas Nido, Francisco Alvarez backstop for a long time. But then again, in some respects, as a left-handed hitter, maybe he complements Alvarez better as well. And you look at Tomas Nido, you do have under control for next season and 2024. So there could be a glut of catchers a year from now, but also if Alvarez is more of a DH catcher playing a role like William Contreras for the Braves this past season, again, this can make some sense. So I think we'll just see how the rest of the offseason plays out when it comes to the Mets offense to really judge it. Because now I think if Alvarez is not part of your team in the beginning of the season, there's going to be more pressure to add a bat to the DH spot and to the fourth outfielder, like another guy that can grab at bats, kind of in a Tyler Naquin-esque role, but maybe doing a little bit more. We're going to get to that in the final segment today. Before we do, though, I want to discuss the James McCann element of this. How can they get him off of the roster? We're going to get into that in just a minute. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from basketball to football to soccer and esports. They got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. The last time I checked, the Mets were plus 900 to win the World Series. I don't think the line would have moved with the Omar Narváez signing, so you could probably find that same line if you go to betonline.net, head to the website today, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. how do you get James McCann off the roster? Complicated question. Very tough. There's a straight salary dump, whether that means you just cut him. But there seems to be trade interest. We heard when the Mets lost Jacob deGrom, he signed with the Rangers. They might have been interested in James McCann. Seems like we haven't heard anything since then. They have Jonah Heim. I don't know why they would necessarily want to get James McCann, but if it was an R.A. Dickey situation where the Mets trade R.A. Dickey with Josh Tolle and I can't remember the other guy. Was it Mike Nickias? Don't quote me on that, but they traded 2 personal catchers for Dickey to handle the knuckleballer. If deGrom loves pitching to McCann so much, maybe that's something that we could see. It is funny when I did see someone tweet out when there was those news like deGrom stats with McCann behind the plate, like put a piece of cardboard behind the plate over the past couple of years of Jacob deGrom, you would have got a good catcher ERA and things like that. But regardless, that's a team that was mentioned. The Cardinals were mentioned at one point as a team with interest. The Pirates, I think, had interest. Maybe we saw the Cubs. Although the Cardinals, maybe when they signed Wilson Contreras, that fell off. A team that I mentioned on, I think it was the Just Baseball show. I don't think I have said it into a microphone on this show, but I might have. When I was talking with Jack McMullen after the Senga signing last week, I mentioned Carlos Carrasco and James McCann as a potential trade to the Orioles. This was just pure speculation, but I thought it was a fit that made sense. And then we actually saw a report later after I had said that the Orioles were interested in Carlos Carrasco. Now, why would they be interested in James McCann? I don't know if they would be. The reason why I said that is if they were interested in Carrasco, which apparently they are, maybe they would take on some of that money to get an expensive backup to Adley Rutschman who could help him along a little bit. The idea would be they'd be taking some of McCann's salary to also acquire Carrasco, and they would lessen the prospect return they would have to give up to get a Carlos Carrasco. So let's just say the Mets they'd have to contract, and you get $20 million cleared off of your books that you can go out and sign a bat right now to trade Carrasco and McCann. Now, with that, you lose depth in that rotation. So, you lose something, you gain something. We'll see what the Mets do. I could see that as a possibility. So I could see that as a way to move James McCann, where you trade him with an established big league piece, whether that is a team that loves Carrasco or Daniel Vogelback. And in those deals, you still probably have to eat some money, but you might be able to maybe eat a little bit less, or maybe you can get a better prospect return, just depending on how you move things around, how you work a deal. Other names that could go out with McCann, if you feel like you have a glut of starting pitching now and you want to trade Tyler McGill, that's an opportunity that you could exercise there. I think you trade a little bit low there if you trade McGill. I think if you trade David Peterson right now, you're trading with his values a little bit higher. But I also like David Peterson on this Mets team, and I can make an argument that of the starting pitchers on the Mets by All-Star break next year, I would not be surprised at all if David Peterson was the 4th best starter on this team. And that is including Jose Quintana and Carlos Carrasco, if everyone's still here. The only reason I say that is because those two guys are in their mid-30s, and David Peterson showed real upside and growth this season. So I could see him taking a big step forward. I like that to be with the Mets, but you also could capitalize on his value right now when it's at its highest. Use him to clear McCann off your books. I mean, you could honestly use David Peterson and get that whole contract off your books. If a team wants a cost-controlled starter, you could say, here's David Peterson and James McCann and just get them both out of there. You could also use a prospect like a Mark Vientos who doesn't really have a home with the Mets when it comes to a position. Get McCann out of here. In that sense, you could maybe trade Ronnie Mauricio with him, which I don't like either of those moves to have to staple. It seems like you'd be going against what the organization's philosophy has been. If you want to stockpile your prospect assets and use money to get out of problems, why use a prospect to get out of a problem in James McCann? You're better off just eating money. If you were to eat $20 million of the $24 million that's owed to him, and James McCann could be traded as a $2 million backup the next 2 seasons, I think he could find a home. The only thing that I don't know is how much other teams are willing to play ball with the Mets right now in trade discussions when they're spending the way they are. There could be a lot of teams that are bitter, a lot of owners even that say, don't trade with the Mets. I don't like what they're doing to the game, forcing us to spend or making things uncompetitive. That's out there too. So a lot goes into this specific signing and the ramifications of it. Again, though, cut and dry. If it's Narvaez replacing James McCann on the 2023 Mets, it's an upgrade. And you just have to see what they do with McCann to really kind of evaluate it. Because if they trade Ronnie Mauricio to dump James McCann and get a player to be named later in return, I don't know if I love this more than just saying, just ride out a McCann-Nito backstop until Alvarez is ready and then roll. And then you do the Cano treatment and you just cut a McCann and get the bad money off your books without trading an asset with it. And again, based on the organizational philosophy, I'd be a little surprised if they gave that type of an asset away. I think you could more see the eat a bunch of money, trade him with a Vogelback, trade him with a Carrasco, trade him with another piece that doesn't quite fit on this roster to a team that, maybe needs a catcher and one of these players. And if, again, you eat enough of that contract down in McCann, suddenly there can be a little bit of value. But what I want to turn to next is, for one, the other signings around the league, because there has been a lot of them when it comes to bats flying off the board, JD Martinez, Justin Turner, others. So we're going to get into those names that just sign with other teams and then look at how the Mets can still juice this offense in free agency. There's also a Carlos Correa pursuit that I haven't even broached on this show. So we're going to get to all that in just a minute. But first, another word from our sponsors. All right, so a lot of transactions took place since I last recorded. The big one was Carlos Correa, because there was half a minute where I was in the middle of finishing up all these shows that closed out your week. If you've been listening on all those shows I put out from Tuesday through Friday, I put together in a 24-hour span. So I'm going through all this before my vacation, and I see the Mets are under Carlos Correa, and my honest thought was, I hope this doesn't happen. And I'm sorry to say that to the listeners who would have loved Carlos Correa, but it was simply a work thought that came to my head. Obviously, it would have been incredible, and I would have loved to do that breaking news podcast, but I felt like that was kind of some posturing where maybe the Mets entered the fray for Carlos Correa because they were in the middle of negotiating with the Giants, and maybe Scott Boras and Cohen are on pretty good terms right now, and maybe, hey, let's let the Mets get in the mix, kind of the way that they used to float the Yankees in the mix on a lot of his free agents to get more money out of other teams. Suddenly, Correa signs a 13-year, $350 million contract with San Francisco Giants, comes off the board. But we've seen some reporting since that does seem like the Mets just showed up late and actually were a little bit interested in adding Carlos Correa, which means they're seriously committed to adding more offense. That's all that tells me more than anything else. So Correa's on another team. We'll see what happens there. I do think at some point this week you're going to get a podcast. Maybe it will be on Tuesday's show if there's no breaking news, diving into all of the shortstop contracts that are out there, because Dansby Swanson got his deal, and now we can get a much clearer picture of how good of a contract Francisco Lindor is on based on what these other guys signed for. Give me a contract with Lindor that ends in his age 37 season, then some of these guys who will be on teams' books well into, or at least not well into, but into their 40s, which is pretty much all the top three guys, with Correa, Bogarts, and Trey Turner getting contracts that take them into their 40s. Then again, those AAVs are lower than what Lindor is making. So it just depends on how you look at it. We'll get into that in a later podcast. But looking at the other contracts that were given out, you have Dansby Swanson ends up with the Cubs. So the Braves got worse. Good to see. You got JD Martinez off the books. He was a DH option. Goes to the Dodgers on a $10 million deal. That is very much I would like to win. I would like to bet on myself to go to a team that is competitive, that I can still make some more money later in my career, but I think it'll be fun to go play on a Dodgers team that's awesome. That's what that is for a guy that's just completed a massive contract. That's what that one feels like, but I think Martinez could have been an interesting fit for the Mets. Now he's off the table, Michael Brantley, I've discussed him a bunch on this show. He returns to Houston. Could just be that he's comfortable there. Could be the Mets were not interested in Michael Brantley. Andrew Benintendi comes off the board. The Mets probably would not have been interested in him after they signed Nimmo. So he's gone. Gallo, I discussed. Joey Gallo ends up with the Twins. 1 year, $11 million deal. I think that's actually some pretty good value, but he gets to go to a team where, and when I say good value, just mean a 1 year deal. If you told me the Mets could have that contract, I'd say, yeah, it's Steve Cohen's money. It doesn't matter. And he could have filled a role for this team. But also there's the whole can he play in New York thing. I'm sure he probably doesn't want to go back to a New York team himself. He gets to go play at obscurity in Minnesota, but for a team that could be competitive, where he could really bounce back and he could play a big role, it's actually a really nice fit for Gallo. Rodon to the Yankees, no reason for that to us to really discuss that in a Mets perspective, but they made a big move there. Trevor May ends up in Oakland for $7 million. Congrats to him. Really awesome to have him as a Met for the last couple of years, and he gets a pretty nice bag. He's the highest paid pitcher, or highest paid player, I believe, on the Athletics now. It's either him or Lemus Diaz. Other than that, you have Justin Turner. He signs today on Sunday as I'm recording this. 2 years, $22 million. Another option for the Mets that comes off the board, but I would not have loved a second year on Turner. He gets that with the Red Sox. So now what else is out there? You got Brandon Drury. You got Adam Duvall. Do all roads lead back to Michael Conforto? Yes, I know. If you are one of these Mets fans that hates Michael Conforto and hates that I talk about him so much, here you are. You're at that point of the podcast. I got you about, 20 minutes in. I'll see you tomorrow if you really don't like Michael Conforto. But let me tell you why you should. Okay, before you just shut me out and don't listen. Michael Conforto, of all the free agents that's left, has the highest upside I see. And when you're a Mets team that's returning an offense that was top 5 last year, all your starters are back, and you have a chance to go from your end of the season roster and you pull Tyler Naquin off it and put Michael Conforto on it, a guy that at his absolute apex could hit 30 home runs while playing exceptional defense in left field. He was good and right for the Mets. Now the shoulder injury is a concern, but what you're taking a risk. You're gambling on him. And if you do that and you get him to sign, well, now you have a platoon situation with Canna, very similar to the one that you had, but Conforto has more of an upside. Mark Canna can play center, he can play left, he can play right. You could say the same thing about Starling Marte if you had to. You can even say that about Michael Conforto in a pinch as a fourth outfielder. So you have coverage there. It makes a lot of sense for the Mets to re-sign Michael Conforto at this point because he, in almost any season you can look back on in their respective careers, you would say Michael Conforto is a better player than Daniel Vogelbach. If nothing else, he could be a much better option at DH, and it wouldn't necessarily be him at DH because he has a good glove. So you could have Canna DH. You could have Marte DH. You can spread that DH around. You could put Canna at first base some and DH Pete Alonso. It would unlock a lot with your roster, especially if you eventually get to the point where Conforto proves he's healthy, everyone else is firing on all cylinders, and you could get to a place where Daniel Vogelbach's not on the roster anymore. That could unlock a lot of other possibilities for you where, let's just say you're a month into the season and you decide, you know what, we're going to go for 3 catchers. We're going to get rid of Daniel Vogelbach. We're going to get Alvarez some time behind the dish, but also have him DH. You got Conforto, you got Canna, you're moving guys around. You still have Guillorme on your bench as your backup utility infielder. Jeff McNeil can play a little bit all over. The roster makes a lot of sense with Michael Conforto on it. And just look at the numbers for their careers and tell me that Michael Conforto is not the best free agent that's left. I mean, there's just not a lot else out there. I'm going to go to our top 50 at Just Baseball right now. Go through the list of our top 50 free agents of who's left. And you tell me if he's not the best guy you can have. Dansby Swanson, off the board. Let's see, Benintendi's off the board. Gene Segura doesn't necessarily fit the Mets. Martinez is gone. And then you get to Conforto at 28 from our list. Trey Mancini's out there. Michael Conforto at his best is better than Trey Mancini. Now, would I be mad at Trey Mancini? No, but at his best, he's better. Brandon Drury's out there. It's been 1 year of Drury, and a lot of the success came in at the Great American Ballpark. There's just not a bunch left in free agency, and there has been that rumored interest from the Mets all offseason. Now, why would Conforto want to sign with the Mets? Maybe we'll do a host show on this week. I don't know. I'm probably overkilling it if I do. Maybe if there's more reports, we'll get there. But here's just the short of it, why I could see Conforto being in. If you give him a 1+1 deal where he's making more money for the Mets next season than anywhere else that he can find a deal. And Conforto has to decide, do I want to play in a place where I can best allow myself to make money on my next contract and play in a really hitter-friendly situation with no pressure, or I can make more money this year, bet on myself even this season, and the fact that I can be a better player than a 34-year-old Mark Canha and a better hitter than a Daniel Vogelbach. Okay? And I actually was in a little Twitter dispute today where someone was like, I just put out just straight OPSs, career OPSs, and how Conforto is of the three players, Canha, Vogelbach, and Conforto, he's the only one with a career OPS over 800. The guy came back at me and said, well, look at Vogelbach's OPS against right-handed pitching. That really changes things. Well, for one, his career OPS against right-handed pitching was 822. I believe Conforto's was 824 for all pitching. But if we're going to give Vogelbach that preferential treatment, let's do the same thing for Michael Conforto. His OPS against just rights in his career was over 870, 50 points higher than Daniel Vogelbach. He's been a better hitter than Vogelbach pretty much every single season you could look at. Maybe 1 year in 2019, Vogelbach was better. Vogelbach had a great season. I'm not knocking him entirely. I'm just saying, in a vacuum, how many times would you really call Vogelbach a better baseball player than Michael Conforto? And I would also venture to say the same thing about Mark Canha. It's not saying you can't have all three on the roster. It's just saying that if you're Michael Conforto, you can bet on yourself to earn playing time away from those guys, and there's still a very real chance he could get 500 plate appearances just plugging him into this roster. I'll end my argument with this. Tyler Naquin got 130 plate appearances in about a third of a season after the trade deadline. Times that by 3, you almost get to 400 plate appearances. And again, I could see Conforto, eating some more playing time than a Naquin did. That's all, though, for today's show. We'll have more time to discuss all of this. It's great to be back. It's the first time I've actually spoken into a mic since last Tuesday, which is rare for me. So thank you all for who tuned into those episodes I put out at the end of last week. And we'll keep things rolling. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show, at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. And for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on around the sports world. You can follow Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.